Hello, and welcome back to Analytics AI Essentials, Quantum Metrics webinar series dedicated to exploring the power and potential of Gen AI and digital analytics. In each episode, we uncover best practices and emerging trends with insights from industry leaders. How do you ensure your AI investments drive real business value? Today, in the third episode of our series, AI ROI, Getting the Most from Future Investments, we're joined by Jake Mackler, AI Practice Lead at IBM Consulting, and David Fred, CFO at Quantum Metric. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dylan. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Friend. I'm the CFO at Quantum Metric, and I'm joined by a friend of mine, Jake Mackler, who's currently at IBM and a practice expert in AI. Jake, it's awesome to see you again. Thanks for making the time. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what your current role is at IBM.
Yeah, thanks, David. Happy to be here. Great to see your face again as well. All right, so you all know IBM, large technology company, invented the typewriter and the computer, personal computer, AI that won Jeopardy and chess. But it's actually also a top 3 consulting firm, kind of like Accenture, Deloitte, and others. So I lead the AI consulting practice for the telco media technology vertical, work with some of the largest companies to solve the biggest data and AI problems. My day-to-day involves translating business needs into solutions and managing a successful delivery for some really cool transformational AI projects. I hope to talk to you about some of them today. And it's a unique role. I get to sit in the room where AI conversations are happening, and for some reason they pay me to do that. So happy to talk to you more about that today, David.
This is great, and I'm so happy they set us up together because you and I are kind of on opposite ends of this AI spectrum.
Yeah.
You may not realize this, but my degree is actually in electrical engineering, and I remember taking an AI class in college, and it was taught by this professor, Patrick Winston, and he's passed now, but he used to be like an AI luminary. And we were learning about neural nets. And he literally said the word, I'm going to teach you about neural nets. It's not going to be an exam. You'll never use them because they're not practical.
Impractical. Yeah.
They're impractical. Yeah. And then we went on to support vector graphs and other things. And now 15 years later, it's completely the opposite. They're the most practical things ever. But what's really interesting about this conversation is you're like on the very, let's put this into practice and like I should actually get business value from it. And I see it from maybe an academic perspective. And I'm still like this Patrick Winston in the back of my head saying it's not going to be useful. But then also more of a small company context and more like piecemeal uses is what we're seeing in my own day-to-day. And so it'll be a fun juxtaposition against, I think, what you see, which is more holistic transformation of these businesses.
Well, and you're my buyer. If I can't get CFO buy-in, how can I get anything done here?
Exactly. Well, I mean, talking about that, how do you, when you're working with your customers, how do they think about the overall value of AI? Like, what is the ROI that they try to construct?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny now hearing your background, thinking about conversations we've had about digital twins in the past, and I now kind of see where this is all coming from. But yeah, when I think about that ROI and what is the expectation they're going to get from these AI initiatives, I think there was a really nice moment for some people like me where it was purely an experimentation phase. There was a slush fund of money that was used to try to throw at any problem with maybe the confidence that this was going to be disruptive enough to the business that you should experiment, but not necessarily the restrictions of we need to tie this to a hard ROI. And I think I would put like 2023 and maybe the first part of 2024 into that bucket, where very much a focus on breadth of experimentation rather than depth of value, depth of implementation. And I think it's a real marker of maturity that we're now moving out of that phase, and I'm now having CFO level conversations around how do we actually start to tie this to business impact? How do we, and not just like the end business impact of, a chat bot or something like that, but also the business impact of the compute required to actually run some of this stuff. So back to your professor and the impracticality of neural nets, it's still really freaking expensive. And so how do you balance the value it's driving with the actual input costs of some of this stuff? And so there's a lot of focus on today employee efficiency. How do we remove the crappy repetitive work and allow teams to work on the value added stuff? Unfortunately, there's a lot of focus on reducing headcount, which I think is a rather short-sighted and potentially can have some negative consequences to it. I personally subscribe to Jensen Huang's philosophy that he said that AI can make companies grow exponentially while you scale headcount linearly. And I think having that growth mindset is probably a better long-term play, but there certainly is a focus on both growth and efficiency here.
That makes sense. So moving from more science project, more experimentation to, okay, but show me the business impact. I know from my own personal experience here at Quantum Metric, one of the things that we're doing right now is we're creating training videos, and we're going through and we're recording them with Zoom, and then Zoom transcribes that. And now you have a textual representation of that training module. And then you can feed that into ChatGPT or into Gemini or your favorite AI. And then that creates maybe a presentation artifact. And now you've jump-started this training material. And it's particularly useful in an accounting department where you want people to have a very procedural way of working through a problem. And you want that problem to be executed the same way every time, which today is still people. But it's cumbersome and just a lot of overhead to create that initial training material. And then you can pass it on to the next person who runs that process. But it's so it's like one and done, right? Like I did it, I created this training material, it's done. It's not part of my day-to-day process. It's more like this project. I was clever about how I might do it more efficiently. When you take that experience that I'm having at Quantum Metric, smaller company, but how do you translate that back to the larger enterprises that you're working with? Like what kind of business projects do you see?
Yeah, and like at these large companies, it's often not one and done because of how complex the business is, how quickly it's changing. I'll give you an example. We're working with a large technology company right now that basically wants to create very, very similar training materials so that anytime they experience a ticket, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Anytime that ticket has been addressed in the past, they just take all the learnings and the disposition from that ticket to inform all future tickets and basically build these effectively playbooks out of the learnings that happen from prior tickets. And so we are
they human playbooks or are they bot playbooks?
Human playbooks. So humans disposition the tickets. We learn from that to create playbooks so that the next human doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And the benefit of that is that it's basically an ongoing process that every time a new problem presents itself, and I think that could even be true in an accounting department. Every time a new ledger presents itself, or whatever accountants do, you want to be able to learn from that. And then I think the key with in either case is how do you measure the impact of that? Because either way, that could just be a fun activity. I mean, it's a great Gen AI use case what you did, but what's the business value of that? And so one of the things that we're very focused on is, okay, the use of this playbook, how do we put that in the context of how long it took them to resolve a given ticket? And how do we actually then develop some sort of ROI model against the fact that, hey, the time to resolve a ticket is X. When these playbooks are used, it's Y. Delta between that is a real business value that then allows them to do more value-added activities.
Do you see people or companies getting started? It sounds like a lot to set up to test whether there's going to be impact. And so you do all this work, and then at the end you get to decide whether it was worth it.
Yeah, 100%. Couple of thoughts there. One is that in both of those examples you just shared, one of the benefits is that you're starting with something that's getting created anyway. In my world, it's these tickets are getting dispositioned, so the raw data is getting created, and thankfully with large language models, they're very flexible. You don't have to do a bunch of pre-processing on it. They can take raw text data, do the processing, and then do something with it. And so the upfront foundational work is probably less, especially for large companies that are willing to spend on the compute, et cetera. And then at least in my context, it's often some sort of pilot that's done at a very small scale on, in our case, like the accounting department, some small department. In the case of a customer service organization like I'm working with, it's like one of many of the different teams that are focusing on different products. Let's prove it out at a small scale, because there's also a huge change management component to it, metric and analysis component to it. Once we prove it out at that small scale, then we blow it up and do organization.
You brought it up, change management. I think one of the things that I'm working with as I work with like my own internal team, and I talk to the executive team at Quantum Metric, is people don't default always to, oh, maybe a LLM can do this for me.
Yeah.
How do you see that culture play out? And and are there certain org structures or cultures that are adopting AI with more success?
Yeah, I mean, putting aside any tactical processes, like it's got to start at the top. It's got to start actually at the CEO level. Like the CEO needs to not only be using these tools, but espousing their use and patting themselves on the back for their use, and creating a culture that then forces the executive team to be using it and patting themselves out and being transparent about it, sharing the prompts they're using, et cetera. And like, it should be a culture of, really as transparent as possible, celebrating the efficiencies and the values that come from this, rather than kind of doing it on the side of your desk, pretending you're not doing it and being 10% more efficient through that. And so I think that's like if C-level is not bought into it, everything else I'm about to say doesn't really matter, because you can do a bunch of processes, but like the drumbeat has to start at the top. Now, once we've agreed that that's important and that's a disruptive enough part of your business that the C-suite should be banging that drum, then there's more that you can do to actually like do it in a rather safe and effective way. For large companies, I think we're seeing a number of different governance structures being put in place. There's like the centralized governance structure where you have a chief AI officer or someone else, like a chief data officer, that's like designated as the head of AI. And they are creating a truly centralized organization that acts as the both enabler and gatekeeper for AI experimentation. Or there's kind of the more decentralized approach where you take leaders from every individual team and create some kind of council that's kind of acts as that similar governance function. But either way, you do need somewhere for both growth and governance that is empowered to strike a balance between those two. I think every company needs to think about their own growth goals and their own risk tolerance, because there's risk in all of this, and growth doesn't come without risk. But I'm seeing goods and bads in both, and I'm seeing a lot of red tape and a lot of places where the Gen AI governance slows progress down to a point where often we will hear like, oh, let's try doing this with ML first, because once it gets that Gen AI kind of tag to it, it then kind of splinters off into the sub process that's going to take us 3 months. And so good and bad, but every organization is kind of actively figuring this out day to day right now.
There's so much in what you just said. And I have to ask a leading question. Like, do you think it's people are mostly risk adverse to data leakage? Is it like the false positive or the false answers that people are concerned about? Like, why is there such a governance aspect to it? I think about the early days of like computing, or the early days of mobile, or the early days of I'm trying to think of another technology. And I don't feel like there's the same level of governance and inspection that's gone into AI.
Yeah, I would venture to guess. I don't know the answer. I think one is that it's a total black box. Like literally, the people that build it don't even understand how it works, let alone the people that use it. And then the other one is that it's really like the first of these innovation waves, like you mentioned, social mobile, whatever. The first of the enterprise ones that's truly consumer led. Like consumers have access to the best model before the companies do, and so what I'm doing at home is almost leading what I'm doing at work in a way that's like really, really scary, because it means that I'm naturally going to like bring some of my work home with me in a potentially really like bad way. And I remember like right when ChatGPT came out, someone from Samsung uploaded a bunch of like IP into it, like core device IP, and like I made a bunch of headlines. And so it's like there is, it's so easy to use the consumer products that I feel like that it's scaring a lot of executives. Now, what is the risk of all of that? It's probably pretty low, that side of it, but the ease with which everyone in the organization can put everything that they have into public clouds right now is probably the scariest part. Hallucinations, I like, humans make mistakes every day. Like hallucinations are just creativity.
I'm going to say that next time I have the wrong answer.
Next time you report to the board the wrong number.
It was the wrong answer, but it was a creative answer.
It's creative as hell. Yeah.
The revenue should have been higher, but this was creative. When you think about actual technologies, there are obviously tons of startups. Where do you see companies going first? Are people building their models from scratch? Are they adapting open source models? Are they using just off the shelf APIs? So where's value coming from in these initial tests and deployments?
So every enterprise right now has probably at least two of the hyperscalers that they've like made a big bet on. So it's, more often than not, it's either AWS and Microsoft, or Google and Microsoft. They kind of put one of those combinations together, and then each one of those obviously has what has become a relatively closed garden. So like Google now works better with Gemini and the open source community. Obviously, AWS works better with Anthropic and the open source community. Microsoft, ChatGPT, here like OpenAI and the open source community. And so, every organization has made that bet at this point. Like that part is relatively mature. There's not a lot. That was like the last 5 years of progress. And so now they all have access to some sort of really powerful foundational model, and then a bunch of small language models and open source models that they can kind of build around that. And so for building enterprise applications, like a customer facing chatbot or an internal employee, HR chatbot or something like that, it's often going to be multiple different large and small language models put together to best balance cost, accuracy, privacy, et cetera. And so you'll often have a really what they call a frontier model, which is GPT-4, Gemini 1.5. That will be the front door. That's the decision maker that takes your first kind of poorly formed query and turns it into an action flow. Then they'll have a bunch of specialized models that actually take actions and do very specific things, because that's much cheaper and often actually more accurate if they're very specialized and highly trained on a specific action. They're less creative, as they say. So that's the enterprise design pattern for building an app from scratch. Hopefully, in many cases, you don't have to build an app from scratch, because there are a bunch of ISVs. There's a bunch of technology companies out there that offer very specific, powerful solutions for very specific problems. So I'll give you an example. I'm a huge fan of Felix. You might have heard of it. It's Quantometrics' new Gen AI technology. And
thank you.
I actually saw someone. I got wind of someone trying to recreate something like that, where they were scraping a bunch of data, having a machine basically watch a video of a web visit and translate that into text and then into insights, et cetera. And there is a company that does that really well, and you could spend $500,000 or $500 million building your own version of this for your own company. It could be half as effective. It can integrate less well into the ecosystem. You can build every integration from scratch, or you can use a software vendor to do it. And so I think that there's a balance between flexibility and effectiveness, both cost and business effectiveness, that you just have to think about there.
Do you think in the parallel of software development, where you can either choose to build or buy a piece of software, you're going to see the same thing in AI, where you can either choose to build a model or use someone else's?
Well, so there's the model level, but then there's the application level.
Sorry, not the model, sort of the application. Felix would be a great example. Is somebody else could go parse a web page, I guess.
Yeah.
But you probably get to the less accurate. It took you a long time to get to the intent piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw Klarna announcing that they built their own Salesforce, and basically got rid of Salesforce.com. That's a crazy example. And I do think that the barrier to building apps is lower in and of itself. And so you will see like, especially like systems of record being disrupted in different ways by the largest of companies. But the value in many cases comes from like the uniqueness of the underlying data. And so I think the reason that I pushed back on this example with a Felix alternative kind of type solution is it's so hard to capture that. The building of the summarization will continue to get easier over time as these models get smarter, but the capturing of the data in a performant way at scale is not necessarily, it's not an AI problem. It's like it's a truly a math problem that is really, really complicated, and that there's just no reason for one company to try to solve it because of just the way that cloud computing and cloud storage costs go. Like you want to do it at the largest scale possible across as many companies as possible in order to capture the best efficiencies. And so I think that like unique data is the thing that companies will be able to defend over the next couple of years. The actual like front end application, we'll see. I think it's only getting easier, and there's so many cool things happening right now.
We talked a little bit about this specific example earlier on of using AI to create these training situations and then being able to better service. Are there other examples that you're seeing in companies where AI applications are showing strong ROI?
Yeah, I think, the bear would say like, oh, the full customer service workflow is not yet being done by a robot. But the bull would say true in many cases, but there are just these like parts of the customer journey that are individually starting to be either augmented or supported really well by AI technologies that I think like if you kind of play that out over the next couple of years, mean that the entire journey is going to change a lot. And so, just to get like for my own day job, we're not yet, when someone picks up the phone, a robot's not answering and doing everything. But what we are doing is taking the learnings from every single phone conversation and trying to orchestrate better post-call actions. And so what I like about that is like, it doesn't have the same change management component. You're not retraining an entire sales force on or firing an entire sales force, but you're just taking the transcript, which is a piece of text that's being created in close to real time, reading it, which is, large language models, core competency, and then orchestrating a series of actions based on it. And that just like felt like the lowest change management, lowest barrier to impact. But if you can use that to, most companies care about like post-call resolution or callbacks, and if you can actually prevent the next call, that's pretty darn valuable with minimal barrier to entry.
I mean, I think about how you actually get your success into production. And the way that I'm hearing you speak about it is so incremental. It's not a revolution. It's an incremental, and you've got to work within the customer's existing products. And so I expect that you're so much working with that product leader, because whoever owns that call center experience, that's the person who has to then work in this better process and then iterate and iterate and iterate, versus I'm going to drop in something brand new. Yes. Is that a fair?
Okay. Yeah, without question. And that product leader now has a bunch of new challenges to think about. I remember when I was at a prior company, we met with Salesforce, and Salesforce was like, someday your entire website's going to be a chat window. And or at least Salesforce.com's entire window will be a chat window. And like, I get it. Like someone wants to talk to sales, but there's so much to learn and to interact with in any kind of company, whether it's a t-shirt seller or a software company. And these product folks are going to have to figure out, how do we make the information available both for human consumption and for robot consumption? And then how do we bring down the ease of transaction, whether that's human transaction or robot transaction? And I do think at some point you're going to have these two constituencies to deal with. You'll have your human constituency and then your robot constituency, and you'll have to kind of balance the needs of both constituencies.
This has been great. Jake, thank you so much. I think we talked about the science behind this. We talked about it moving from a science project to like actual value that we're starting to see in the enterprises. I love this big company perspective, because in the 500 people we have at Quantum Metric, the projects just have a different scale to them. So it's neat to see the vision for how this is going to impact the companies that I work with as a consumer. And I think, reflecting back on our conversation, some of the culture impact
has been super interesting. And I feel that day to day is it's we see the headlines as consumers and we think, oh, this is revolutionary, but then you actually see the front lines and it feels much more evolutionary and incremental. And as a CFO, I actually don't object because I would rather see that value, see it proved, and then you can come back to me for a bigger bite of the apple.
Yeah, I like getting your CFO perspective, honestly. It's very helpful.
Well, thanks. And I will hand it back to Dylan.
Thank you, Jake and David, for a great session.